1:31. If you're not early, you're late, like my boss says. Let's get into it. All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Q3. Who would have thought? Who would have thought? It's already May. I'm Sara. If you don't know me, I'm an SAP recruiter with Precision Sourcing. This is my colleague, Chay.
Hi, guys. How are you doing?
And we are here to present the Q3 market report. So, as a bit of a way of introduction, in case you don't know us, we're Precision Sourcing. We've been operating in this market now for 11 years in SAP, and it's going to be 20 years actually this year across technology in general. But obviously, everything about SAP today and what the market has been up to, it has been turbulent. So we're going to be going through a couple of things, but I'll start with a bit of a market update and overview. I think that some key takeaways that we can see is, yeah, like I said, turbulence, the word. I think that the last 24 months, a lot of us, like us included, and I think even SAP Australia included, thought we'd see like a steady rise of work. And instead, what we've seen has been a pretty bumpy ride. So first off, I do want to provide, if I can, any level of support or comfort in that if you have experienced in the last 24 months a tough time, a challenging time, I really want to impress upon you that this is not an individual experience. I think that Chay and I and the team of 7, we speak with hundreds of people a week, and it's been difficult. So we've seen, obviously, after COVID, a massive boom. And I would say over the last 24 months, a bit of a market correction. So after that initial COVID, just everything went crazy. Budget surpluses were there and money was just getting thrown around. There was a real quick whiplash to that tap turning off. And now we're slowly but surely gaining a bit of confidence again. I don't think we are fully cooking with gas at the moment. We are gently simmering, and it's going a little bit better, definitely, than it was last year. So as the market's evolving, so are the workforce demands. We're seeing a lot more chat around heavier workload. Return to office has been a huge, huge one. I think some of you may know, but even Woolies have introduced a strategy wherein in the next 2 years, they will work their way back up to full-time in the office. So there have been a number of changes that have, I think, influenced both candidates and clients in operating in this market. From a client perspective, they're seeing more commitment start to come from their staff, but there's at the same time more responsibility added on without any raises, without rate increases. I think what we are in right now is a market that is very quickly and unexpectedly shifting its dynamic between client and candidate. So Chay's going to go into a little bit more detail about the knock-on effect that that's had specifically on S/4HANA.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as a lot of you may know, obviously, and have experience yourselves, right, with the S4 market is, I think, taken a bit of a hit. A lot of pausing, delays. In terms of the actual market over the last 18 to 24 months, realistically, success factors has been one of the areas which has really kept the wheels moving in the market. I think that's one of the probably most consistent areas. And ERP in itself has been very, very stagnant. Sara and I, she'll probably agree with me on this, but we sat down as a team at the end of 2023 and we looked at all of the customers that we work with, the ones that we've got sort of commercials with, we currently work with at the moment, contractors that work in there, and we've placed permanent people in their teams as well. And I think at the time, from memory, there was 37 customers that were projected to move to S4HANA in 2024. Now that number actually only ended up being 5 customers out of the 37. So as you can see, there is a substantial backlog of S/4HANA programs in Australia that are yet to kick off or for various reasons have not really moved any further. And I think that kind of comes into the point that I'm trying to make sure that for the last kind of 18 months, so to speak, a lot of C-level in businesses have been really, really cautious around budgets. How do we get to S4? And it's gone from why do we need to do it? Instead, the conversation has now moved to how, which is, I think, it's
a good indication.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it's really showing more signs of positivity. But if you really zoom in the last, January to March of what this particular report is for, we have seen a substantial amount of strong pipeline projects coming up. So, a number of customers that we work with, but also new customers that we haven't worked with as of yet, really getting to that tail end of the business case, right? So, they've gone through that prolonged period of, right, how are we going to get there? What's the approach? Are we going to do a brownfield? Are we going to do a greenfield? Maybe even look at a blue field, right? Obviously, that's also an option as well for a lot of different customers. So I think that's been a substantial delay, and that planning phase, so to speak, more than anything, has taken a lot longer than maybe what a lot of businesses had sort of had planned for, I guess. And I think that where we're at right now is that a lot of customers I've now finished that. They're getting to the end of that business case, and they're really starting to look at, should we start going to select an RFP and select a vendor. So that's kind of where we're seeing things right now. So I think that, the next number of months will be really, really interesting from an S4 standpoint. And also to note that SAP Australia recently reported that they had one of their strongest quarters in terms of sales in the last 3 years, right? So obviously SAP themselves, they've had a number of restructures globally, but it's common knowledge that a lot of people would know that. So, from a sales standpoint, I think even themselves have had a bit of a tough time, I guess, or stagnant period as well. But I think looking on it's certainly looking a lot better, a lot more positive. And I think that from our side, obviously there are 8 recruiters that only focus on SAP within our team. We speak with hundreds of candidates, hundreds of clients, on a weekly basis. And from a consulting standpoint, obviously, consultancies are now really starting to get a bit more traction. They're looking to sort of bring in kind of senior level roles into gearing up to start building out their teams, right? And that from our side is generally a true indication of that they're these kind of business cases are getting to the final stages, and the consultancies are starting to kind of beef up their teams, ready for what we expect to be a really, really busy period. When that will be, I think it's still kind of, we're not quite there yet. But over the next couple of months, and certainly the new financial year in Australia, I think that will really start to kickstart that S4 push and the amount of programs that we see in Australia. So yeah. I think here Sara will run you through a bit of detail. If you are a hiring manager in the market, you're looking to sort of build out and you're planning your sort of resource strategy for your team. I think Sara's going to run through some sort of key insights around that.
I do. So I think one thing that Chay and I and the whole team have definitely noticed in the past, probably 6 months, is a bloated interview process. It has been added steps, at the last minute. A decision maker that wasn't previously included in an initial interview, all of a sudden you need to redo a full process.
More approvals.
Yeah, more approvals. It's even harder to get budget approved. And look, I do get it. If you're a hiring manager, the reality is, particularly I think of a large or global conglomerate, your shareholders have a lot of things on their mind, and S4HANA is probably not even on their radar right now. We've got a global economy that's on the fritz, tariffs being imposed from the US, potential wars. This is a scary time, not just for businesses, but for people. As you can imagine, it's a high level of stress. So as we come through, and look, it really is a question of when and not if. We do know there will be a hiring surge. There is no doubt about it. Chay mentioned that only 5 had moved to S4HANA in the last 12 months. There are over 400 clients that run SAP in Australia. Not even, I think, more than a quarter of them have moved to S4 yet.
Yeah, it's quite low.
It's quite a lot that needs to happen in a pretty short space of time. We're looking at the next 3 years. So if your interview process is not absolutely spick and span, if you're not turning around CV feedback maximum 48 hours, if you're not booking in interviews after that within 24, like these are the crucial touch points. And it's not just a question of, am I getting the right person on my team at that time? This is now a reputation game. There are some companies out there that have had such poor candidate experiences through their interview process that now some people, despite this level of kind of anxiety in the market to get a job, will avoid them. So do not think and don't be lulled into a false sense of security that, oh, well, it's a buyer's market, you know, the experience is what they get. I think that a level of empathy, but also just good interview processes and a well-defined process is going to make you move faster, and that is essential for locking in just the best talent that you can.
I think just on that interview point there, I think from what we are seeing as a team, customers that have efficient interview processes are really getting the pick of the best talent on the market. And what I mean by that is, you know, some clients will have multiple rounds and then one of their competitors has moved super quickly and that candidate is off the market who's going to add a substantial amount of value to that kind of role, right?
Yeah.
Certainly, whether it's contracting role, a permanent role, I think that is probably one of the key things that if you get that right, that will really help you moving forward.
Massively. And look, the same is to be said of rates. Chay's going to go into it a little bit just after this, but we've actually seen an increase in contractor rates. Again, I think that there's a misconception that it's a slow market, therefore good talent is everywhere. I would argue that your challenge as a hiring manager is now instead become, it is a slightly slower market. That means to find that needle in a haystack, I need to sift through a lot more hay than I did in that buyer's market. Because now you're looking at applications and jobs wherein if you've posted an ad, you're probably averaging at like 300 people or so per meeting. It's really difficult to kind of go through that entire process with your whole job still underway. So it's something to be noticed that definitely if you're not offering the right rates, like what's the cost of bringing in the wrong person, put it that way, and then needing to rehire, having delays. If it's an extra, and it normally is, if it's an extra $100, $200 a day, cop it and put the business case forward to cop it. This is a really key one. I think that, again, similar to when people have started to say that they're looking for someone to join, but they want to potentially bring forward maybe sorry, we've had someone hijack our room. There we go. We're fine now. If you have someone that you've interviewed and you like them, don't try to find the candidate just to compare. If you like them, if you know they're a strong fit, if they are a good culture fit, if you know they are the right person for the job, do not waste that precious time. Again, the best candidates are still not often looking for a role, and more often than not, they still have more than one opportunity on the go. And I feel it especially now in the market. I cannot tell you how many candidates I've started an interview process with, and at the beginning of the interview process, they had no other opportunities. By the time we get to offer a week, sometimes even later, all of a sudden they've got 3 other offers that are soon approaching the table. This is happening more and more and more. I definitely recommend not falling into that trap of shopping around. And then final, approvals are key. Again, Chay and I have said that we've seen a lot of bloated processes in terms of interviewing. I think approvals are massive. Do not go to market if you can't ensure that this role is approved, and you will have absolutely no roadblocks in bringing on a candidate. The worst candidate experience that you can give someone is interviewing them, having them meet your team, presenting them with a verbal offer, and then when you go to get that contract released, all of a sudden you've got 2 to 3 weeks of paperwork that you hadn't accounted for, or you need to now get an escalated approval because budgets are that much tighter. Doing that due diligence at the beginning, it's boring. You may think you're losing out on clients and candidates and talent. You're definitely not. just putting in that time at the beginning, I think is so key and instrumental in getting the right people on.
I think it's more likely that there are further challenges that come up during that period if an approval has not been completed, because the likelihood is that candidate is either actively in the market, they've got other opportunities, and I think we can both talk about the times or experience whereby a candidate will move forward with something else, right? So I think that's really important around that approval piece, and having all your ducks in line before actually going to market will help so much, when you are looking to hire.
Now over to Chay for candidate tips.
Yeah, so if you're a candidate in the market, currently sort of looking for work, right? Whether that you're in a role now or you're not in a role and you're actively looking, obviously it's been very challenging for many in the market, right? And I think with limited businesses hiring, it has been really challenging, and we've experienced that. Having conversations with many candidates for quite a long time now. I think one of the biggest recommendations and advice that I would be able to give a candidate in the market is, I personally worked in the European market, I've worked in the US market. They're huge. They're absolutely ginormous markets of SAP, right? You've got, number of countries. In Australia, it's a super small market. The chances are that when you're interviewing, you may know someone who works in the company, right? You may know someone who worked for the hiring manager. You may have worked with the hiring manager before. It's a super small market. And every candidate that I work with, I always just encourage them to really sort of look after their reputation, because it really is crucial. And having a strong brand in this market really does help. I had this example just this morning with one of my clients are looking to hire a role, and I introduced a candidate, and they had known that particular person through a program manager that they had both mutually worked with, and they were mutual connections and so on. And that candidate has a brilliant reputation. They've done really well, and the likelihood is that they are going to move forward with that particular role, and it's really comes back to sort of focusing on your own brand and your reputation. So I think just being transparent as you navigate that job market, whether that's your availability, your location, your flexibility, and being transparent around what you can commit to. Obviously, Sara has just alluded to the fact that a lot of companies are really looking to kind of bring back some on-site aspect to the working schedules. But look, if you're looking for 3 days a week because you need to have some flexibility to pick your children up or whatever that may be, I think just having the conversation, right? I had this exact conversation just recently again with a candidate who only wants to work 4 days a week. To be honest, I didn't actually know if the client could do that. Had the conversation. That's a possibility. Kind of everyone's a winner, right? So they were really upfront and transparent with me doing that. And I think from a rate standpoint as well, that's really key. Whether you're working, you've applied directly to a role online and you're dealing with a talent team, or whether you're working with a recruiter. I think sometimes many candidates may think that a recruiter is trying to get you at a certain rate. That's not the case. We want to present you at a rate that ultimately you're going to be happy with, right? We don't want to present you at a rate whereby, in a month or two, you're back on the market, right? Because no one's a winner there. And again, from a customer standpoint, they could be back to square one. So it's such a small market, and I hate to say it, but I've seen people really damage their reputation in this particular market. Any candidate that I work with, our role as part of being the recruitment consultant is to kind of protect your reputation as well. So always being transparent with anyone you're working with, whether that's an interviewer, a new manager, hiring manager, your recruiter, talent teams, just really, I think just focusing on your reputation is really key, especially as we transition out of this stagnant market into a really busy market. The likelihood is is that you probably will start to get contacted for a lot more opportunities than you have done in the last 6 to 10 months, and maybe even beyond that. So you want people to remember you for the right reasons and ultimately not the wrong ones. In terms of you've got a lot of new technologies coming out with SAP, right? DataSphere, public cloud. There's so many different new technologies, and what we see typically is that consultancies generally will win a lot of work, and arguably more often than not are going to be working with the newest technologies, right? So if you're looking to gain experience in a technology, you've not had the opportunity to do that just yet, and you're contacted about, or maybe working for a consultancy, explore that, understand, what is that going to do for your career? What is that going to do for your roles in the next sort of 5 to whatever years, right? I think that, a lot of candidates that we have been working with want to move into these new technologies, and ultimately, the likelihood is that the best opportunities may come from a consultancy. So having that flexibility, that may be a good opportunity for you to gain that experience.
An open mind is always good. Conscious of time, because we want to have some time for a Q&A, we will whiz through this final page, but this is really straightforward. The job titles in demand. This is a really good indication. If we've gotten a lot of requests for project managers, program managers, enterprise architects, and solution architects, that is normally a fantastic indication of a wave of work coming. Again, it may not be as soon as we'd like it, but all of these roles are hallmarks for the beginning of a building block to a large program of work. So this was a really strong indication for us to have a bit more confidence. Chay is going to go into a bit more around DCP. I'll let him do that. But funnily enough, the skill sets in demand that we've had in the last quarter are a blend of new and improved, as well as just your basics like FICO and EWM. EWM especially is probably the nichest, most sought after skill at the minute, just absolutely no one available. And that's worldwide. I've got tier 1 consultancies tapping me asking whether I know anyone anywhere with EWM, because even their global bench can't fit that demand. So just something to be aware of. And like I mentioned, rates have risen. It's again a show of confidence, 1.94. I again am the strongest believer that the best contractors I know are still the ones that get tapped on the shoulder. It just goes to show if you're having your network work for you, I still think that's the best way to get a role as a consultant.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that I'll just sort of go through this pretty quickly, and we'll send you a copy of this after the webinar. But ECP, Employee Central Payroll, is up there with EWM in terms of demand, and it's a very, very limited talent pool. I think every single consultancy in Australia, I'd be very confident in saying that they're currently in the market looking for skills from an implementation standpoint. So having that experience with implementation is so sought after in this particular market right now. We actually, as a team, looked into and did a bit of a project around this, and there are currently 33 ECP consultants with implementation experience, with functional configuration experience in Australia. 5 of those are employed permanently, and 28 are engaged in contract roles. So, the ECP work is kind of never ending, to be honest, because a lot of these contractors are very rarely looking for work. So it's a really sought after skill, and it's quite a challenge. So, if you've got experience with ECP, from a support standpoint, you want to get implementations, it could be worth looking at maybe a consultancies, or even if you're getting contacted for that, how you can kind of upskill to kind of gain that experience, because ultimately we need more people in that particular area. But we'll dive into a Q&A. I'm not sure, we actually can't see if there's any questions in the chat bar, but feel free to put some questions in the chat bar. And Sara and I can answer that if there are any questions.
And of course, like Chay mentioned, if you weren't able to join, this recording is going to be released on YouTube. We'll be sending out the report to anyone that did join, or at least registered to join the event. So just keep an eye on your emails. You'll be coming through from Precision Sourcing. But yes, any questions that you have at all, now is the time. don't be shy. Just pop them in the chat bar and we can go through them. But while they come in, I think we did touch on it. It is going to be a question of when and not if. I think I get a lot of fearful questions from people when I speak to them now and they ask how the market's looking. It is going to get better. Stephen, how are you seeing the market in New Zealand? That's a good question. Kind of following along Australia. There are definitely pockets there, and I think it's a bit different. There are just less clients with SAP, but the ones that are there, you're looking at Fonterra, Zespri, Suntory, Oceania now. Actually, I would say New Zealand's a bit ahead of the curve in terms of their S4 journey than Australia. They've kind of just gone for it. So we're definitely seeing a little bit more activity. But now with this return to work, I think during COVID, we used to be able to share resources a lot between Australia and New Zealand. A little bit less so now. I certainly am working with a lot of clients in New Zealand who are only interested in working with New Zealand-based resources. So yeah. I would say that's kind of key.
Yeah, definitely. I think New Zealand is, it's we're seeing S4 projects that have already kicked off and currently sort of, probably well underway. There are a number of S4 programs that are planned to kick off there. And I think that if you are based in New Zealand, that's brilliant.
Yeah,
because
that's key.
I think a lot of our customers are looking for, people who are based in New Zealand. So that's brilliant.
Yeah.
Michael, thanks for that question. Look, from a project standpoint, I think it kind of alludes to the fact that what we mentioned around, I think probably, to be quite honest, there'll be much more project demand in the new financial year. Between now and then, I think, I know that one of my customers are going to be moving fairly shortly. They're currently going into the RFP stage and moving forward, right? So I think that to answer your question in terms of, will they kick off super soon? Maybe not. I personally think around sort of August, September is when we will see project kickoffs and getting straight into it. But I think that, from a project standpoint, there will definitely be new projects that will be kicking off in the new financial year.
Thank you, Ashok, for your questions. Demand for PM, cutover, and deployment managers. Look, I would say project managers, yes. Cutover and deployment, less so. I think that's just because there has been a significant drop in actual projects going forward. As we start to see more of a project pipeline, I think we will see a large increase in cutover and deployment. They are actually quite niche skills. I think a lot of people have done a cutover or have done a deployment, but do they specialize in those areas? No. So if that's a differentiator for you, I think that's a really good thing. And then we've got a question from Michael. BTP adoption.
Mustafa.
Oh, sorry, Mustafa. Massive, Mustafa. Really big. I do not know of a client, but this is a bit like AI. I do not know of a client that hasn't asked me about BTP and whether the skill exists in the market. And if we were to go whole hog down BTP, are there enough resources to sustain our footprint? I think that similar to AI, a lot of managers know they should be doing something with it, but they're just not sure what. So I think there is an education piece that has been missed between SAP Australia and their end clients as to what can you do for BTP and how can it uplift your current landscape.
I think one of the challenges around BTP, Mustafa, and you probably would already be aware of this, I think that there's so many different functionalities, right, and so many different areas. I think sometimes customers don't actually know what they want. And I think that, they may come to us with this, ideal BTP requirement, but realistically, what they're looking for is actually not one person, because obviously they're looking for maybe a number of different, very, very niche areas.
Integration or development.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that it's been for us more of a speaking with customers and really understanding exactly what they need, because sometimes from the first conversation, at least from my experience, that the need and demand is 100% there, and it's only going to increase, right? Because how many businesses are going to have to use B2B and also want to, right? Because it's just going to help them so much as a business. But I think it's a bit of what's the word, immaturity, I guess, around sort of what it can do and exactly what kind of person they need. So I think having someone in their business that is very knowledgeable around that really helps. And even, some of my customers, we've had really deep conversations around exactly what they need, and then figured out that actually they are looking for, X and not X, Y, Z, and the rest, right? So that's probably what I would add there. Abhishek, TSS visa holders. Look, I think this is a very common question that both Sara, I, and the rest of the team get, right? To be quite transparent from customers that we work with, right? At the end of the day, we partner with them typically on sort of, project work and niche requirements. And very rarely do we work with customers that actually allow visas or allow sponsorships, right? And look, I'm from Wales myself, right? So I had to come on a visa myself, and I understand how it works. However, I think it is quite challenging. My recommendation, and Abhishek, more than happy to reach out to you after this to take it offline. We're going to have another conversation. But look, applying directly sometimes helps because you'll get a talent team that can see your experience, and then they are probably more in control of can they sponsor, can they not? Yeah. Whereas, if we're working with the program director or head of technology or CIO, they want a specific niche requirement in the next 2 to 4 weeks, which ultimately can be quite challenging around the sponsorship side of things.
Yeah. And then just very quickly before we wrap up with Michael, what work do we see with the New South Wales public sector? Bit of a can of worms, I'll be honest. I just got off with a client earlier this morning from a large New South Wales department. I'm well aware that there's been a directive from the New South Wales Premier to cull senior leadership roles by 15%. They have been doing that over the last 3 to 6 months. So that is an area that I think, look, again, the decisions that are influencing, particularly, I would say, government SAP footprints are no longer just do you have budget or do you not have budget. These are decisions that, again, global economy comes into play. A federal election has just happened. I'm aware that state governments are always a bit different, but like at the end of the day, budget's the budget. I think that it will be a little bit of a recovery time for federal government and state government to start picking up again. Having said that, Queensland government, absolutely going for gold. So take it with a grain of salt as well.
I think with state government, right, one of my best clients is, has a lot of involvement in that particular space. And I think that, a lot of these state governments are kind of wall to wall SAP, right? So, they utilize SAP for their entire organization and they kind of have to move at some point. So whether the work is now, it will come up because if they're not on S4, they need to move to S4 by a certain date. Because they're a state government, they could fall into that kind of caveat. Where they're a big sort of, I guess, a big buyer from SAP, right? And they're a big customer, so they may fall into that trap of 2030, 2033. But I think that there is generally a consistent flow of work from state government.
A lot more fixed term at the minute. So if that's your flavor, then absolutely go for it. That is everything that we have time for today, though. But please, 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 if you did have a question that you didn't feel comfortable popping in the chat or we just didn't get to it, apologies if not. Reach out to Chay and I on LinkedIn. Yeah, absolutely. We're always on there, as I'm sure you are aware. So if we did miss a question, please send it our way. But otherwise, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Madura.
It's been so lovely seeing you all.
Thanks, guys. Cheers.